And so with that reading from Genesis 4, 1 through 7, we will call upon our brother Dan. His topic is self-sacrifice. Brother Dan.
Good morning, all. We're fewer in number than usual, so it's good to have you here. Self-sacrifice. About 8 years ago, Beth will remember, we took a trip to India for work, and as part of that trip, we had the opportunity to take a side trip to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a big island south of India. And the reason we went there, Massey, you should connect with this, Barnak, we went to Sri Lanka because we wanted to meet some people who helped you guys and Robert and their family. So we had heard some very good things about the people of Sri Lanka. So we got to know Brother Carl Blaylock, who you know, right? Pardon?
His real name is Khurshid.
But okay. He's Pakistani, and he's living in Sri Lanka as a refugee for many years, actually. And he was kind of an organizer of the church, and he had helped a lot of our people that we know, that went from Iran to Sri Lanka and then somewhere else. So we thought it was a great opportunity to go meet him, and they were true refugees. If you're a refugee in Sri Lanka, you're not as welcome as you are in some places. So you basically can't work, and there's certain things you can and can't do, but you're not, I wouldn't say the arms are wide open for you. And eventually refugees were kind of pushed out the door. So Brother Carl was, I thought, a living example of someone who gives sacrifices. He gave of himself and his family to help others. So when we, it was interesting with the place, we were there on business. So for business, we stayed at a fancy 5-star hotel, with all the bells and whistles, really fancy. And then that night we went to stay at Brother Carl's house. And he was a refugee, and you can imagine he did not have very much at all. It was like you'd expect. So when we slept over, Carl and his wife were kind enough to let us sleep in their bed. And their bed, which was the nicest one in the house, was not nice. But what they did, now you have to understand Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is like 200 degrees temperature. It's hot, right? It's hot, it's humid, day and night, like it is hot. So it's hard to get used to it from our culture. So these guys come from that temperature to our winter, it's night and day. So anyway, they gave us their bed, and it turned out that their bedroom was the only room in the house that had air conditioning. So they sacrificed their own bed and the air conditioning for us Westerners so we could have some comfort. And they, I don't know where they slept because the house wasn't that big, but they basically made a sacrifice for us. So that was something that I remembered very, very nicely of Brother Carl. So have you had people sacrifice for you? I'd like you to think about people that you know have made a sacrifice for you. All of us have a mom somehow or other. Everyone has a mom, and that mom made an awful lot of sacrifice for her kids. So just bearing them, birthing them, diapers, parenting, all those things are really hard. Like you have 4 little kids, a couple of moms here with 4 little kids. Is that easy? Is that life easy? I don't think so. That's a lot of sacrifice. Someone, for all of us, has provided a home, some place to live, some kind of food to get by on, some kind of clothing to exist in. Someone made a sacrifice to give you all those things. If you're like me, you remember a lot of people who helped you give rides. So when I was younger in college and high school, I didn't have a car mostly. So a lot of people gave me rides. And I can think of Sue gave me a ride to Detroit one time that I was really thankful for. Other people gave me rides here and there. I had a friend in high school that gave me a ride my first year of college. And I mostly remember Mark and Jane Hewitson, where in Bloomington, they gave me a ride lots of places, to the church and Bible class, and to the grocery store. So it wasn't that it was convenient for them, it was out of their way, but they went out of their way to help me get by, and that was their sacrifice. I remember Trent in college that he let me stay with him one semester. I don't think he really wanted me to, but that was his sacrifice. You could say it worked out great. I was appreciative, but I think it was a sacrifice on your part, and that was appreciated. I remember growing up that a lot of people taught me in Sunday school, and I was not an ideal Sunday school student. I'm sure I was a pain in the neck. I'm sure Mickey can remind you. Mickey and Eunice and Cease were some that I remember teaching me often. And just thinking back, I know that I was rotten and difficult to teach. So I now appreciate the self-sacrifice of those Sunday school teachers. So there's many ways to sacrifice for others. Sacrifice is basically giving up something you value. Could be money, could be stuff, could be time, lots of things. So here's some examples. Any of you go on diets? Most of us do at some point in our lives. That's a hard thing to sacrifice, food. You have to sacrifice not eating. That's a real sacrifice. Now you do that in order to get a benefit. Some people fast, and there's spiritual fasting, and that benefit is a spiritual benefit. For some people, sacrificing sleep. Like when you're raising little kids and they're 6 months old and you don't get sleep, that's a heck of a sacrifice. Maybe it's not an optional sacrifice or one you'd pick, but it's a sacrifice. For some people, quitting smoking would be a sacrifice, or stopping drinking alcohol. For some people, it's working. Maybe it's working 2 jobs in order to sacrifice and provide for yourself or others. Some people's sacrifice might be donations. Maybe it's a financial giving money to someone or something. For a lot of people, sacrifice is time, where you donate your time. Maybe it's to help someone move or to help someone do something. In my work, I run into a couple professional athletes now and then, and when you hear their stories about how they sacrifice to become what they are, it's kind of like famous people don't just get there. Like they sacrifice their time, their relationships, like everything. So they have this really regimented life and schedule where they're sacrificing everything for their end goal. So, back to the Bible. Can you tell me some Bible examples of people who have made some significant sacrifices? What are some that come to mind? Abraham. That's a literal sacrifice. That's a rare one. So it doesn't have to be that serious, but yes, God called Abraham to literally sacrifice his son. How about some other ones? Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice. Yes, can't avoid getting there. Who's some other ones? Paul? Paul sacrificed his time, his body, by being beaten and stoned and everything else. His life was a life of sacrifice, wasn't it? It's a good example. Some others? Noah. So Noah sacrificed everything around him. God told him what to do, and he started building, and yeah, whatever else he did, he stopped doing it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All right. So they sacrificed, actually they offered their lives on the line. They could have died, and they said that. They could have died, but they were still going to be faithful no matter what. You think of some others? There's lots. Hannah. So Hannah, she gave up, I was trying to think, what did she do? She gave up Samuel. Yeah, so first she prayed for him, and then when she received their blessing, she promised, and she kept her promise of a sacrifice of letting her son go, which I'm sure for a mom would be a really hard thing to do. All right, well, that might be enough just to get your mind thinking. There's one group in the Bible that sticks out a little bit to me, and that's the group of widows. There's many widows who give a lot. And sometimes you might come to think that those who have the least in the world give the most. So rich people, it's easy to give a lot of money or a lot of your time if maybe you have time. But if you have the least, if you have like this much, like that's all you have, and you give that, Even homeless people do that sometimes. If you give them money, they may go share it with their friends or give it to one of their friends who has need. It just seems like sometimes the least give the most. And widows are one group who tend to give the most. So you might think of Ruth, who kind of gave up her home, her life, everything she knew. Abigail, she became a widow, and she left her life. Anna in the New Testament. And we're going to look at one in particular more on top of that. So if you would, look at 1 Kings chapter 17. We're going to take a dive into this widow. She's known as the widow of Zarephath. 1 Kings 17. This is a story about Elijah, the prophet, the early part of his being a prophet. So it's 1 Kings 17, and we're going to read from verse 9 through 16. 1 Kings 17, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. It's in that area. And stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So Elijah's supposed to go from Israel to an area of southern Lebanon. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he said to her, please get me a little water in a jar that I may drink. As she was going to get it, he called to her and said, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. But she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I am gathering a few sticks that I may go in and prepare for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. They had nothing. That's all they had. So Elijah says to her, do not fear, go do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first, and bring it to me. Afterward you may make one for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. So she went and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke through Elijah. It's a pretty amazing story of a woman who has nothing and who is commanded, and she willingly sacrifices and gives everything, even at the risk of her own children, which sure seems like a lot. Most moms, I don't think we want to hear a request like that, and we don't. I don't think we generally do. So, who is this woman? What do we know about her? Not much. We know this is all we know about her in this chapter. She's a widow. She's a mom. She's a Gentile. She's from southern Lebanon. So she's a foreigner from Israel. And Jesus had gone, sorry, that's a different story. Elijah had gone there really to escape Ahab. So this is because the famines in the land. So she has no husband. That's really about all we know about her here. What is she doing? Well, it says in verse 10, she went to the gate of the city to gather sticks. Now, it's kind of interesting here that there's only two places in the Bible where people gather sticks. You realize that? Two places in the Bible people gather sticks. Here and where? Someone said, what? Exodus. That is correct. My reference is Numbers 15, so that's probably the same thing. Numbers 15, the man who is caught carrying sticks or gathering sticks on the Sabbath. Remember that? It's Numbers 15:33. So this is when they're just setting up the Sabbath laws. This is the first instance of somebody breaking the Sabbath willfully, and he got killed. He got killed for picking up sticks in the Sabbath. So here's another passage where a widow is going to gather sticks. She's not an Israelite, so the laws of Sabbath don't apply to her. She's just trying to preserve her life. And she gathers sticks. And it's interesting that she goes to the gate of the city, which I thought was kind of odd. Why would you go to the gate of the city to gather sticks? Like, is there a big pile at the gate? Don't know if that's the answer. Perhaps there's something else we're going to learn about that. But I thought it was interesting that gathering sticks is not a common thing. Just the one man who dies, and here's the woman who's going to live from sticks. So where's Zarephath? I didn't have a map to show you, but if you take the coast of Israel, right along the coast, up towards Lebanon is Zarephath. And so that is north of Tyre and south of Sidon, just to give you a little context. So roughly it's 25 miles into Lebanon from where Elijah's coming. So he had to walk a little ways to get there, and it would be a safe place for him away from Ahab. So she goes to the city gate, and I think there is more to the city gate here for this woman. You know, Proverbs 31 talks about the faithful woman and her husband sits at the gate because he was important. Well, she doesn't have a husband because he's dead. So it could be that she is important and she was able to go sit at the gate. Maybe have nothing to do because she's there to gather sticks, but it does mention she's at the city gate. There's another interesting passage in Proverbs 1 that talks about wisdom. So in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20, it says, "Wisdom shouts in the street, she lifts her voice in the square. At the head of the noisy street she cries out." This is wisdom. "At the entrance of the gates in the city she utters her sayings." That's interesting. "How long, O naive ones, will you love simplicity? And scoffers delight themselves in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge. Turn to my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you, and I will make my words known to you." So maybe there's a reason why this woman is specially chosen. That's going to be our next one. Why did God choose her? Perhaps she was a woman of faith and of wisdom. So when did this happen? About 860 BC. Ahab is the king. And if you look at the chapter before this, 1 Kings 16, verse 31, we get another little piece here. So 1 Kings 16:31, it says, "Came about as though it had been a trivial thing for Ahab to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, that he also married Jezebel." She's the bad one. "Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worship him." So that's interesting. Jezebel, her family's from Sidon. So that's where this is just like the suburbs of Sidon. It's just outskirts. So she would have grown up believing in Baal. That's what the people believed. So she was probably taught that, but I don't think that's what she believed based on what she says here. So anyway, that gives a little time frame about her. So how did this happen? Well, I thought it's interesting, starting on verse 10, when Elijah sees her, he basically asks for three things. He asked her to get water, then he asked her to bake a little bread, and then he asked her to do it first for him. You know, the first one, drawing water, that might be not too bad because you just get some water. There's plenty of water. The second one, to give him bread, she already says she only has bread for two. That's it. So when he asks for bread, you know, that's a hard thing, and she's probably going to say no. And the third thing, he asked for it first, which a logical person would say, well, I guess you're going to eat, and I'm not going to eat then. So three things Elijah asks of her, and look at her responses. So verse 12, she says, "As the Lord your God lives." That's a statement of faith there. She says, "As the Lord your God lives." Now maybe that's your God, but it seems to be a statement of belief for her. And I think it's the reason why God called her and sent Elijah to her. "As the Lord God lives, I have no bread and only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil, and I'm getting ready to die, my son and I. This is all I've got. This is it." So Elijah says in verse 13, "Do not fear. Go, do as you have said, but make me a little bread first and bring it out to me, and afterward," he's kind of commanding her at this point, "afterward you may make one for yourself and for your son." And then he gives her the reassurance in verse 14. "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bowl of flour should not be used up or exhausted, nor the jar of oil empty, until the day the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth." This may remind you that this passage is repeated in 2 Kings 4, when Elisha, this is Elijah, just to confuse you, Elisha follows this in 2 Kings 4, And basically, this is when he tells her to go get more vessels and to keep pouring oil. So the husband died, another widow, and another one provides for Elisha and takes care of him. So why her? Again, back to 1 Kings 17. Why was she chosen by God? We might get a hint in Genesis 24. You remember the passage when Abraham sent his servant to go find a wife for Isaac? It's in Genesis 24. Remember where he went? He went back to the old country, looked for a wife, and he had this prayer. And he says, may the one come out who I ask for a drink of water. And she says, yes, and I'll water some for your camels. May she be the one for my master. And that's what happened. So it's interesting. Ask for a jar of water there, ask for a jar of water here. You might also think of Cornelius. Again, why is someone chosen? Cornelius, remember the angel came to him and said, Cornelius, your alms and your prayers have been heard before God. These have ascended to God as a sacrifice. So interesting. Perhaps this woman from Zarephath was a praying woman. Perhaps that's why God called her and prepared her for Elijah. Why flour and oil? Why are those two mentioned in this passage? Well, I think there's a point pointing to sacrifice. Sacrifice. Yes, go back to the law, Exodus 29, verse 23. This is talking about the priest. You shall take the fat from the ram and the fat tail and the fat that covers the entrails and the lobe of the liver and the 2 kidneys and the fat that's on them and the right thigh. Then 1 cake of bread mixed with oil, and 1 wafer from the basket of unleavened bread which is set before the Lord. You shall put all these in the hands of Aaron, in the hands of his sons, and wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. So there's something about a wave offering that has to do with oil and bread. In Leviticus 2, you get a different kind of sacrifice. And the law has many kinds of sacrifices. So that's the first one, the wave offering. In Leviticus 2, verse 4, it says, when you bring an offering of a grain offering, first one's a wave offering, here's a grain offering. When you bring an offering of a grain offering baked in an oven, it shall be of unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. So you have the same thing, bread and oil. And if your offering is a grain offering made on the griddle, it shall be of fine flour, unleavened mixed with oil. You shall break it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a grain offering. So there's rules about how to do these specific things. So the first one's the wave offering. Now we have a grain offering. There's also a peace offering in Leviticus 6. Leviticus 6, just starting in verse 1. Sorry, Leviticus 7. Leviticus 7. This is the law of the guilt offering. It's most holy. In the place where they slay. Okay, it's going to go through the animal sacrifices. Sorry, verse 11 it's going to start with. This is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which shall be presented to the Lord. If he offers it by way of thanksgiving, then along with the sacrifice of thanksgiving, he shall offer unleavened cakes mixed with oil, and unleavened wafers spread with oil, and cakes of well-stirred fine flour mixed with oil. With the sacrifice of his peace offerings, for thanksgiving, he shall present his offerings with cakes of leavened bread. So, very interesting. We had a wave offering, a grain offering, and a peace offering. All about bread and oil. Just like this woman, this poor widow. So this woman's actually mentioned by Jesus. One of the places is in Mark 12. In Mark 12, actually that's not the place. Luke 4. Luke 4 we find her. Verse 41. I'm messed up, sorry. Luke 4, verse 25. So Jesus is teaching the people here. He talks about no prophet being welcome in his own hometown. He says, I say to you in truth, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, when a great famine came over the land. And yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. So Jesus calls attention to her as a faithful woman and a place where Elijah went to stay. This is a woman who sacrificed. She gave up everything she had at the risk of death, really, and yet she was rewarded. There is another, just briefly, a widow in Mark 12, one that Jesus encounters. Mark 12, verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and began observing how the multitude were putting money into the treasury. The rich people were putting in large sums, and a poor widow came, just like the woman in 1 Kings. She came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amounted to a cent. Whatever it is, it's a small amount. Penny, nickel, dime, it's something small. And calling his disciples to him, he said to them, Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the contributions to the treasury, for they all put in out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she owned, all she had to live on. She made a great sacrifice. And it's not how much you give in that sense, but it's what you give and what your heart really says for you. We learned from Genesis 4 about Cain and Abel that all sacrifices are not good, right? Cain came and he made a sacrifice. He gave his fruit or vegetables or whatever, and God didn't honor that. He basically said, this is not right. Cain took offense at that. Here I am giving my vegetables and you don't even honor it. While Abel was honored. Abel gave the first fruits of his flock, and he was honored. Yet Cain killed Abel. So God cares about our sacrifices. He cares about not just the type of sacrifice, but what's inside, how we care about our sacrifices. We know this specifically from Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verse 4. It says, By faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, God testifying about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. So Abel had a better sacrifice, and there's many places where God talks about rejecting sacrifices that are not from the heart. So, my question for you is, what do you value that you sacrifice? What do I value that I sacrifice? Some things are easy, and maybe we wouldn't even call those sacrifices. If I give someone $10 on the street, that's not a sacrifice to me. If I only had $10, that would be a great sacrifice. So we have different ways of things that we sacrifice for others or to God. One lesson we get is from Psalm 51. This was the life of David. Psalm 51 verse 17 says, The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. So sacrifice doesn't have to be a physical thing. Here the sacrifice of God is a broken spirit. It's our attitude. It's what's inside that God judges us by our heart. In Hebrews 13, we get a great passage for this subject. Hebrews 13, this is really the best one. Hebrews 13, verse 15. Through him then, through Jesus, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of lips, and that give thanks to his name. And do not neglect doing good and sharing, for with such things, with such sacrifices, God is pleased. So in this little passage here, Hebrews 13, 15, and 16, Talks about sacrifice of praise, sacrifice of thanks, sacrifice of doing good, and sacrifice of sharing. The word sharing there is the same word for communion. So when we break bread each Sunday, that's a sacrifice. That's what Hebrews 11 says. It could also be sharing with others, but the word is communion or communing, sharing. That's where communism comes from. The ideals are that everyone shares equally and everyone has enough. That's how Acts 2 started. But do not neglect doing good and sharing, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. Romans 12, the first verse. This is one of our last lessons. Romans 12 says, I urge you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. So we are called to make our bodies a living sacrifice, a living and holy sacrifice. That's sometimes hard to do. The world tells us the opposite, that we deserve this, we're the best. Everything we hear in the media is the opposite of a verse like this, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice. So, the exhortation today is to consider your ways. Consider your ways for how you sacrifice and how you can sacrifice. And then, as Paul said, to examine yourself. So we'll finish with a passage in Galatians 2 of the greatest sacrifice. Paul says in Galatians 2, verse 20, I have been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and delivered himself up for me.